Israel is facing tremendous challenges at the aftermath of the terrible attacks by Hamas on October 7th. Throughout the years, Israel's high-tech and economy have proven to overcome every crisis. Israel will do so again. We will be honored to welcome the Israeli ambassador to Switzerland, Ifat Reshef. Unfortunately, she is stuck in traffic somewhere. She is not stuck in traffic, she just arrived. Ifat Reshef, you made it. We are very honored to have you here, and thanks for coming. Our partner, the Tel Aviv University Swiss Friends, is represented today by the Vice President, Dr. Schewa Mandel. It is also my pleasure to introduce to you our two distinguished experts for the topic of today, Professor Moshe Zviran from Tel Aviv University, welcome, and Dr. Daniel Witschi from our other partner, the Dreyfus Bank, welcome. At 1:30 p.m., we will conclude this part of our program and invite you to stay and enjoy a flying lunch together, if you speak 20 minutes. Okay. Dear Ifat, first, I would personally like to thank you for the great work you do here in Switzerland. You are facing huge challenges in defending the Israeli standpoint during this crazy time. A very warm welcome to you and your team. Dear guests, Ifat Reshef, the Israeli ambassador to Switzerland.
Good afternoon. It's great to see so many familiar faces here. And I would say I'm very happy to be here with you, but happy is not a word I take lightly or use easily since October 7th. So, words are not enough to express the gravity of what happened. And as you all know, this weekend we will be marking yet another sad commemoration day, 6 months, half a year since the massacre took place, and in the Israeli society, collective body, and in our wounded souls, we have a huge hole of the 130 people taken to Gaza and are still in Gaza, taken on October 7th, together with the 4 who were already there, and until they're back, we are forever not just scarred but wounded. That said, I am pleased to be here with you to discuss the Israeli economy today, because after 6 long months, that seems like 6 long years, we are adjusting to the new reality, which, as you know, is very uncertain and is very challenging. I think, Ilan, challenge is a word we'll be using a lot today. But that's the name of the game, challenges. And Israel, has a record of dealing with challenges. I would dare say successfully dealing with challenges. They will be bigger experts and much greater experts than me to explain this to you on a practical way. But I would add my voice in saying that, yes, I believe strongly that we will come out of this challenge scarred but victorious, and that our economy would bounce back, not just bounce back, but as seen in the past, rebounds in a way that the growth would be much bigger, much more impressive, and our very successful high-tech industry that is going through tough times, not least because a lot of its workers are currently doing their duty as reserve soldiers, would not just adjust, but build on the experience gained now in many, many ways in dealing with the many problems we're having as a result of the war efforts. just become better, more efficient, come up with even more creative ideas. And as we managed to come out successfully, economically speaking, out of the COVID, we will do that again now. So it's time to discuss it, and I have to say we are at this, I don't want to use the word new normalcy because there's nothing normal about the situation, but we have a new routine now because 6 months after the massacre, we came out of the shock, and as I said, we're still hurting, we're still bleeding, we're still counting the dead, but we're finding solutions. We're finding how to conduct a war that is, like wars are, gruesome and difficult and painful, and can at every given moment come to a certain pause or halt because of a possible deal on hostage release, or deteriorate to a much larger scale war on the many fronts that Israel is being attacked on a daily basis now. And in this huge, uncertain environment, we're operating, we're functioning, we're adjusting. We will go back to rebuilding our communities, evacuated both in southern Israel and in the north part of Israel. And we will make sure our economy continues to improve and continues to grow. And with that, we need your help, we need your partnership. We need people to continue to look at Israel as this promising place to make business with. So I want to thank, first and foremost, our dear friends from the Chamber of Commerce in organizing this important event. I want to thank the Swiss friends of the Tel Aviv University. I want to thank Dreyfus Bank. I want to thank all the friends and supporters that helped put together this very important event. I want to thank all of you who came. I want to thank our great speakers. I'm sure I'm going to learn a lot today. And I want to leave you with two things. My call and request to come and invest in Israel, work with Israeli partners. By the way, next week, together with our friends from the trade and industry mission in Geneva, there's going to be, for the first time since October 7th, we are renewing the economic and scientific delegations from Israel. So we're going to have an AI and digital health delegation of startups, Israeli startups. They will come to Zurich and they will come to Basel, and we will and a lady from from the Israeli Innovation Authority. And as we look at 2024, we know it's going to be very challenging, and as I said, overshadowed by uncertainty. But we're going to continue to work and working to improve and secure the continued growth of Israeli economy is going to be an important part of it. So partner with us, come and invest, and partner with Israeli startups. A, because you're all friends and supporters of the State of Israel, and this is the way to support us now. And B, because it's good for business. It's good for your business. Believe in us, work in us, invest in us, and you will be an important partner of the growth that Israel is going to experience, not just in the day after, but in the continued efforts that would last as long as it lasts. Thank you all very, very much, and I'm looking forward to hearing our guests today. Thank you.
I am happy to introduce you now to the Vice President of the Tel Aviv University Swiss Friends. Please welcome Dr. Schewa Mandel to the stage.
Dear Excellency, Mrs. Ifat Reshef, the Ambassador of Israel in Bern, your husband is not here. I thought your husband would have been here, so I would have welcomed him too. So Ambassador Ifat Reshef is an alumni of the Tel Aviv University, as her husband too. Right? Yes. Dear Ilan, President of the Chamber of Commerce, Switzerland, Israel. Dear Dr. Andreas Gut, Head of Bank Dreyfus. Dear Dr. Witschi, Executive of the Bank Dreyfus. And last but not least, dear Moshe Zviran, with his wife, Rachel, welcome to Zurich. The terrible attack on Israel was something which changed our lives. And it changed also the life of all students, all working people, everybody, mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters. I'm only going to talk about Tel Aviv University, because that's why I'm here. But we have everybody in our hearts. So Tel Aviv University is the biggest university in Israel. It has 30,000 students. It is a full university, which means that there are all faculties in there. And it is a great, great university. I'm not saying it because I'm vice president. I'm saying it because I was there, and I saw the whole campus. I saw the wonderful buildings. I'm sure you have already visited there, one or the other. Also the Bota synagogue, which is not only a synagogue, it's there are rooms for everything. And there is a lot of art in the campus, and a lot of places where you can sit down and learn and discuss and whatever. So it was founded in 1956 as a very small university and grew to this big point. Now, many of the students were called to the army. There were 6,000 students who were called to the army. And unfortunately, some or too many didn't come back. And all of them were not able to study, but they were also not able to work, as they had to be in the army and they had no income. So Tel Aviv University built up a scholarship fund for these students to enable them to study when they are back now, and that they don't have these problems of financing in the short future, and can get to their places where they really want to get and to work and to be part of their business or wherever, also music, also health, every part. So this is one thing, one project which Tel Aviv University has funded, has done. And the other project is the National PTSD Clinic. This is post-traumatic Belastungsstörungen. Disease, pardon? Stress disorders, yeah. So this, many people, I think also we are a little bit caught by that, but we can not imagine what the Israeli people are going through, and those people who have been or in the army and came back now. So Tel Aviv University has launched this national PTSD clinic at the Tel Aviv University, and it is building it up for support of its students and its workers, and it's also for the publicity. So we are supporting it, we all, with our supports. We have made calls for helping and financially. And we are, if you want to know more about the Tel Aviv University, we have booklets here, and you can take the papers. So I think the theme of what we are doing in cooperation with the Chamber of Commerce, which we really thank you for being able to participate and to make this cooperation, is very important because the economy is really challenging. We were thinking, how should it go on? And now it's half a year in war. So we are very eager to listen to Dr. Witschi and to Professor Moshe Zviran, and I'm giving you the floor.
Thank you very much, Schewa. All I can say is that I'm very happy about the cooperation we're having, and I think it's a promising start. Let's go on this way. It's my pleasure to introduce to you, distinguished guests, Dr. Daniel Witschi, to my right. Dr. Daniel Witschi has been a member of the Dreyfus Bank's Executive Committee since 2013 and head of clients and investments. He joined the bank in 2001 and held posts of chief economist and CIO. Before this, Dr. Daniel Witschi was head of global economies and financial market research at UBS, both in Switzerland and in the USA. He studied economics at the University of Basel. He will speak about the resilience or instability of the global economy. Daniel, I'd like to start by asking you two questions, if you allow me. What do financial markets say about the future growth in Israel? Number two, what are the prospects for global growth in the wake of the post-COVID rise in global interest rates?
Thank you.
The stage is yours.
Thank you. Her Excellency, the Ambassador, expressed hope that the Israeli economy is rebounding and that growth is resuming. And when we look at financial markets, we can look at various variables. One of the more insightful variables would be exchange rates, the other one, stock prices. If we look at exchange rates, the markets would say Israel is already in the process of rebounding. You can see here the exchange rate between the Israeli shekel and the Swiss franc. It has had a weak period. You can see the light blue line, that's the exchange rates, Israeli shekel and Swiss franc. It's been very weak for a couple of months. It's been especially weak during the acute war period. It's been actually diving a lot, but you see that recently there's a clear sign that there's an upward trend in the exchange rate. You can read this as financial markets having more faith in growth resuming. Actually, what you see here is our very rough estimate of a purchasing parity exchange rate. So we are back to fair exchange rates, maybe. Optimism will carry the exchange rate above that equilibrium exchange rate, who knows? But this is a first sign that markets have actually regained hope. The other thing we can look at is stock prices. And you can see here various international stock exchanges. There's the Standard & Poor's 500, that's the benchmark US index. Then we have the Swiss Performance Index, that's the red line. And we have two other indices. One, the orange, is the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange 125. And the blue one is the Blue Star Israel Global Technology Index. Now, when you keep up with those, there's the same message. The market is actually regaining strength and going up again after a period of instability and uncertainty. But it seems that investors are coming back, and we would expect this to continue. We have looked at a couple of external forecasts for the Israeli economy. This is just very brief, and I will not say a lot about this. This is what private forecasters say. We can look into our Bloomberg screens and check what 16 private institutions say about growth in Israel. And there you can see that basically this year and next is seen as a period of moderate growth followed by a strong rebound according to those forecasts. But we can also keep up with official forecasters like the OECD. And they have a similar message. They expect very strong growth next year. The IMF, which obviously has the most econometric power, the most quantitative, the richest econometric model, they already expect this year for growth to resume its strength. You can see here they expect 3% growth in Israel already in 2024. So this all means financial markets and forecasters are all expecting the economy to rebound and regain its former strength. Now, how does this weave in a global context? And we talked about the IMF and what the IMF says about Israel, and they have a very positive perspective. They expect global growth to move sideways around 3% this year and next. You can see how this actually is detailed with regard to the other major economic blocs, the US, the European Union, Euro area, China, India. It's a mixed basket of strength and weakness, with the European Union and the Euro area probably the weakest link in the chain, and China growing probably a bit faster. But this masks very strong cross currents in terms of positive and negative influences on global growth. When we look a little bit into the past and we keep up with growth rates, you can see that actually the US, which for us, for the West, is the most important economy, has had a quite weak period starting in 2021 after the pandemic, and last year, the orange line, that actually shows the US. The US has come back and accelerated again. China actually resumed its growth even earlier, although it's slower than in past periods. You can see here what the figure says for Israel. It's been this downturn arising from the terrorist attack, but again, we'll see a rebound if we believe financial markets and forecasters. And you can see that the weak link here is the Euro area, or Europe as such, which fights with a vicious energy transition challenge coming from the gas crisis and the Ukraine war. That's hitting particularly Germany. So it's a mixed bag. The most important country for us, again, is the US. There you see accelerating growth rates, and the issue is whether those growth rates will stay as high as they were. Inflation has come down massively, as you can see here. In the wake of the COVID pandemic, we have seen an explosion in inflation. For the US, going above 8%, which is a lot. You can also see that Israel also went through a period of higher price pressures, but that from an international comparison, the rise in inflation in Israel was not very exciting. Actually, it was a very good result. And for China, you can see that they actually currently are even in deflation, reflecting weak consumer spending. So growth, according to the forecasts, should move sideways with regional differences. Inflation has come down and probably will stay down, but there's quite unusual, we are in quite unusual times, especially with regard to the US. And there's a lot of smart people expecting a recession in the United States for various reasons. Here on this chart, you can see recession probabilities estimated by various institutions and models. For instance, we can look at what professional forecasters say. These are 81 academic institutions tracked by the Federal Reserve, and they come up every quarter with a likelihood or a probability of a recession. Or we can keep up with what Bloomberg participants say. Those are the financial market participants. They come also up with forecasts. Or we can look at models, basically, quantitative models looking deep into markets. And when we look at those indications combined, we see that overall there seems to be more recession risks than in the past. And you may wonder, why is that the case? It's because interest rates have risen a lot in the United States. As a result of the COVID pandemic and as a result of the increase in inflation, US monetary policy has been tightened a lot. And you can see on this chart how much interest rates were raised since the start of the tightening phase in the US. This is the current tightening phase. You can see that interest rates were lifted by almost 5%, or roughly 5%. And the other lines show you prior tightening periods where money was made scarcer by lifting interest rates. And in past periods, most of these tightenings, most of the rise in interest rates produced a recession eventually. That is still the price question, whether today we still have elevated recession risks or not. The reason why so far we have not seen a recession is a very atypical situation in the United States, because fiscal policy was extremely expansionary. On the one hand, the central bank lifted interest rates, which is bad for growth. On the other hand, the central government, the federal government, spent a lot of money. And they sent checks to households, for instance, during the pandemic. And they sent so much money to private households that they had more money than if they had worked. They could accumulate those transfers, and this is shown on this slide here. It shows you the excess pile of savings during the pandemic. Imagine you can't go to work, you are out of employment, but you get regular payments by the federal government. Every week you get a check. You can't spend that because where you want to spend it, you can go to Amazon and buy the fifth VCR if you need that, or another TV. But largely this has been saved, it has been put aside, and it has created this pile of cash that can be used for consumption. This is one of the reasons why so far the rise in interest rates did not produce a recession. And the question is whether it will still come. I'll skip that slide. We don't know that. We go by data that comes in on a weekly, on a monthly basis, and then we decide whether recessionary forces are intensifying or whether they are getting weaker. So far, the likelihood of a recession is still moderate, but that can change. So that remains a major uncertainty going forward. The other uncertainty with regard to the United States is the elections. There's two candidates in the US that stand for different economic policy programs. If we go by the polls, and if we go by the betting markets, Mr. Trump will be elected. You can see this on this slide. This is the result of the most recent polling effort. Trump is now about 3 points ahead of Biden. And you may wonder, why is that the case? Because there's obvious drawbacks that both candidates have, including Mr. Trump. And the answer is very easy. During the Biden administration, the average US household had declining real wages, which means in inflation-adjusted terms, the average US worker has earned less than before. This is shown on this slide here. On the one hand, you can see the real wage, that's the dotted line, and you can see the approval rating in economic terms. People are asked how well the government does its job, how well the president does its job, and they can answer with regard to the economy and to other issues. And when they are being asked about the economy, they say Biden did a lousy job because I'm earning less. And that may have an important impact going forward. If we will see a recession in the United States, Biden's fate is sealed. He will not be re-elected. And that's the result of various analyses that you can see here. Should there be a recession in the calendar year of an election, the chances of the president would be a third, 33%. If the recession happens this year, but it ends before the election, it would be 0%. And if a recession happens 1 year before the election, the likelihood is still 0%. So we'll see. If we see a recession, it will be almost an assurance that Mr. Trump will be re-elected and Mr. Biden will have to leave. I'm leaving that one. It just shows you that polarization in the United States will stay live and elevated. But we have to ask ourselves, if Trump is re-elected, what will he do in economic terms? What will he do? He will slash taxes. That's what he did before. That's what Mr. Biden partially sort of cancelled. Mr. Trump will slash taxes again, and he will certainly slash corporate taxes. That's what he did in his first administration, in his first term. You can see what he did when he was elected in 2017. There was a gigantic boost to corporate profits as a result of that decline in corporate taxation. So we will have to expect a similar move from his side, and it will be very favorable for shareholders as a first reaction. But he will do other things also. He will probably raise tariffs. That's what he did in his first term, and tariffs are something that not everybody will like. They will take their toll on global growth, and they will gradually have a negative impact on stock exchanges and other economic exchanges. You can see on this slide the World Trade Uncertainty Index as the light blue line that arose from the increase in tariffs that Mr. Trump decided. And you can see what US industrial production did as a result of that. Uncertainty with regard to tariffs is always bad for global production of goods and services. So that's the other thing. Tax cuts on the one hand, which will be nice to have, tariff increases, which will be bad. And those increases in tariffs will hit a global economy that is still heavily globalized. And there's various measures how you can measure the globalization of the world economy. This is one of the more standard ones coming from the Central Planning Bureau of the Netherlands. And when you keep up with that figure, it shows you the degree of globalization. You don't see any sizable deglobalization in the last few years. Globalization has not progressed more, it hasn't intensified or accelerated, but it hasn't declined. And so rising tariffs will hit a globalized economy. Who will be affected by this? You can see on this chart how much China is the world's major exporter. We took this analysis from the Council of Foreign Relations. They actually, with great effort, calculated these data, and you can see that the disequilibrium is between the US as the deficit country and China as the surplus country. So there will be a lot of volatility going forward and a lot of uncertainty with regard to the relationship between the US and China. The other thing we have to keep in mind, falling corporate taxation, falling tax rates mean higher deficits in the United States, higher state and budget deficits. On this slide, you can see a comparison of what the Trump administration would mean for those budget deficits as opposed to the Biden administration. And you can see on this slide the deficit, the budget deficit in the US would be about 2 percentage points of GDP more elevated than under the Trump administration. That is usually bad for bond markets. So we have to brace for a lot of anxiety and nervousness in that regard. What do we do in this context, in this environment? We, as I said, we find it difficult to say the recession will come or it will not come. We have developed a quantitative tool that helps us to grasp financial markets with regard to their growth expectations. And that indicator that we developed is still green. It tells us if a recession comes, it will be far in the future. It will be not imminent. That has a time frame of about 3 to 6 months. Anything behind that is open for discussion. But for the time being, global growth is going to be strong. You can see here what this indicator actually did. It's depicted here. It's in the green area, and you can see that it basically helps to get a feeling for the trends in the global equity market, which is a signal for growth. This is what we measure in terms of this indicator, and I have to say a final word about inflation. Inflation has come down. This is an indicator that helps us to gauge the intensity of price pressures in various countries. And it says if this indicator goes down in the minus area, it would tell us that price pressures have been elevated. They are likely to remain elevated. But you can see the indicator actually moves up, which means there's still elevated price pressures, but they are abating. They are not as strong as they used to be. But on average, it would still suggest to us to stay cautious. So the final chart I want to show you is this index of uncertainty. It basically would not be surprising if we go through exciting times going forward, given these two forces that we can actually forecast to some extent, and it would mean we would probably see a lot of volatility going forward. But for the time being, we're part of the game, and we're surfing along, nicely moving up stock markets, which also convey a positive picture about growth. Thank you so much.
So, I also have a question, Moshe, to ask you. It's a long question. Let's see if there is a short answer. We would like to hear more about the Israeli perspective. If today's event had taken place a year ago, we would have focused on the wonders of the Israeli high-tech and its role as a driver of the Israeli economy. However, as we know, Israel suffered a terrible attack on October 7th, and the following war in both the north and the south of the country has had a significant impact on the economy generally and on the high-tech industry in particular. As a professor of the Business School of Tel Aviv, what's your viewpoint on the Israel economy regarding both those sectors, the general economy and the high-tech economy? Moshe, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So, Ilan has put me in a very difficult position. I'm the one separating between you and lunch. So yesterday when I told him I prepared this presentation, it's going to take me about 30 minutes, he got pale. And he said 20, so we started negotiating. Now, the problem is you cannot remove me from here. So I'm an Israeli. So welcome here, and I'll try to entertain you. Hopefully, I think I kind of colored my last slide in pink. So I'm optimistic. So if you see some dark facts, wait to the end. And I think we're going to, at least it's my view, I think we're going to survive. I think we're going to flourish. I'll try to prove how. And probably Ilan saw the presentation because his question is anchored in some of the slides. So without further ado, I was born in Tel Aviv. My late parents are Holocaust survivors. I grew in Tel Aviv. I served in the intelligence unit of the Air Force. I was enlisted on the very last day. I should have been enlisted before the Yom Kippur War. I was enlisted right after the war. I was busy for the first year in trying to understand what happened there. So basically you can realize my agony that it happened again 50 years later. But my education is all from Tel Aviv University. My undergrad is in computer science and math. And then at the business school, I moved to the States for a period of a few years, came back, became a faculty member of the Tel Aviv University Business School. About 20 years ago, vice dean, and then dean of the school until 22. And for the last 4 years or so, I'm serving at the president's request as the chief entrepreneurship and innovation officer. Now, I'm going to explain in English the Hebrew meaning of being requested by the president. He was newly elected, and he's a good friend of mine. And we had a chat at his office, and I told him about the importance of the high-tech industry to the Israeli economy. You can realize he knew that. And the specific role of Tel Aviv University in growing entrepreneurs and feeding, being the alma mater for many of the entrepreneurs. And he asked me, what are you going to do about it? And I said, at the school we are doing it already for about 15 years. I would like to basically broaden the scope and do it university-wise. And he said, 3 answers. First, the answer is yes. Secondly, no title. Thirdly, no compensation. I'll go and work. So, so this is what I'm doing for the last few years, and I'm trying to promote entrepreneurship and innovation. And I'll show you what we're doing, how we're doing, and maybe even recruit you to help us in doing it. So let's talk about economy. And I must admit, I didn't see the slides of the great presentation we had earlier, but it's a great, basically, introduction. I'm not going to talk about the world. I'm going to talk about Israel, but basically how it is positioned. And I will talk, well, let me go back to the first slide. I was told when I was young that you should break your presentation into 3. Tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them what you told them. What I'm going to tell you what basically I'm going to tell you. So, this is basically the Israeli economy pre-war. I'm not talking about the war, I'm talking about 2023. We had 2 major events, the judicial reform, revolution, both start with an R, so you decide what it is. It's a Gaza war, and then, this is basically the front page of The Economist of about 4 weeks ago. It says everything, but this is the pink one. Actually, it's blue. This is my view about what is going to happen, hopefully a bright future. So, how we entered, some macroeconomic facts. We entered the war pretty good. If you look at the chart, okay, it's not an eye test, so don't try to look at the names of the states. Israel is there, I marked it with a flag, but you could see Switzerland is in red, US is in blue, and the dark here is OECD. But generally speaking, we're doing pretty good. I mean, with all due respect, we're neither Luxembourg nor Ireland, okay? But we're solidly positioned in the middle, and but this was pre-war, okay? Some more indicators, and you had all the facts from the previous presentation. So I just want to show you, when you look at the chart, I just want to show you the trend, not the particular figures, but generally speaking, in all regards, we're doing pretty fine, both in the GDP growth, in government budget deficit, and so on. We're doing fine. Ups and downs, but fine. And there is one reason for the economy, and it's called high tech. With all due respect that we found gas, for many years I was joking that we have gas, but we have no clue what to do with it. Finally, we start using it, but we found gas, but the locomotive that drives the Israeli economy is the high tech for many years. It started in the 80s and early 90s of the previous century. It started, one of the boosts was the immigration from Russia of many educated people and so on and so forth, and the government support. But if we look at the last few decades, Israel had some 35,000 startups. About 9,000 are still active. Some of them, many of them, collapsed, but many grew to be substantial companies, and many were acquired by global players, and we'll talk about it later. Basically, when you start a company in Israel, you start to scale. Okay, now that is what we say. Typically, you hope to scale, and practically, at a certain point where success is shown, you're being acquired, in many cases, by a global player. And again, we'll touch base on it later on. The high-tech industry is about 17% of Israel's GDP, but about 50% of the exports. So this is the locomotive, okay? Those that visited Israel, we don't have yet the bullet train, okay? We have Rakevet Israel, which is not exactly like this, but this is the locomotive. If you look at the high tech, this is how the locomotive starts. We have about 500 accelerators and incubators. One of them is at Tel Aviv University. We have venture capitals, all of them. Some are Israelis, but they are funded by external money, and some are US and other VCs that operate in Israel. Everybody understands that, generally speaking, if you invest in Israeli technology, there's a good chance that you'll succeed. And you don't succeed in each investment, but if you're a VC, most of them are pretty successful. So this is how we started. Now, this is no secret. Everybody talks about Israeli success, but there's a reason why it's here. So everybody heard about the discount key and Waze and the checkpoint as I would say, the capital of cybersecurity. And all of you are using today WhatsApp or WeChat, which basically the technology comes from Israel, anchored in ICQ and vocal tech. And, since we're talking 2024 in the middle of a war in Israel, you cannot ignore the contribution of Israel to defense systems with Iron Dome, Davis Sling, the Arrow, and recently the Iron Beam, which hopefully, and I personally hope, that it will be operational sooner than later and help us with all the threats that Israel has. I know that it has been to trials already during this war. It is not yet fully operational. Hope with me that it happens, as I said, sooner than later. By the way, I have seen a demo by the head of the DDRP and the head of Rafael. It's an amazing thing. I mean, this is going to change the world because those that are familiar with the Iron Dome, each interceptor is, I don't know the exact figure, but from the newspaper, it's between $50,000 to $100,000 a piece. The laser beam is $2. And you're not limited to how many missiles you can fire. It's almost endless. So we do hope for that. The world is going to look a little bit different with regard to defense, not attack. But remember, this is how we made our mark, and I'll talk about it as we progress towards your lunch. I talked about the startups, and I said that there are two channels. Some of them, like Amdocs and NICE and SolarEdge and others, grew to scale, and at some point in time, of course, they were IPO'd, and the stocks are traded, and they are worth in the billions. Many were acquired by US corporates. Now, this is the sure thing how to start your operations in Israel, getting close to the great engineers, great veterans of the IDF and so on with the great ideas, having them in your labs. So if you look at companies such as Microsoft and Meta and Google and Cisco, all the others, how they started in Israel, they simply acquired one or two startups. That was, I would say, the root. And then they grew internally, but they had Apple as well. So, and you know, the largest one in this capacity was Cisco, because during 1 year they acquired 9 companies. They killed 3, mismanaged. But the rest is basically Cisco Israel. And currently, as I said, we have about 500 of those in Israel, multinationals. And I'll soon show you the exchange rate. I will, instead of, just to make sure that we're not aligned, I'll do it in US dollars, so you went to the local currency. But generally speaking, many of them at the beginning of the month are basically pouring foreign currency to Israel to pay salaries. Okay, so there is a flow of foreign currency to Israel on a monthly basis. So what do we have? This is our ecosystem. Unique in the world, okay? And it has everything. On the one hand, you know, if you look at Silicon Valley, okay, which is basically our role model, Silicon Valley is basically fed by Stanford and Berkeley as the producer of talent. And, you know, I'll show you a model in a few slides, and we think that the universities in Israel have the same role to produce the talents, which is true, by the way. But in Israel, unlike other countries, there is another producer, the army. Now, most of you will think now, okay, he's talking about 8200, those of you that know the unit, or other technology units. No. Even if you look at a combat soldier that is, as we speak, in the battlefield, when he or she, now there are many she's around there, but when he or she are coming back, they are more mature, they are more ready to start a company, and they are already resilient. They saw something in their past. So university only contributes to them. We are not the only source. And so we have the security segment, the defense segment. We have some well-established Israeli companies, multinationals, and so on and so forth. It's a proven and working ecosystem, and the results are there. They were actually exhibited in the chart I showed you. That was the result. But that was the optimistic part, and there is another optimistic part at the end. Let's now go to the bottom. Okay? Now, where is the but? It comes, and as I said, 2023, there are, I would say there are 2 crises. One is the judicial reform. Okay? And I cannot be fired from the university, so I can share with you some of my views. I was not in favor. Okay? So Rachel and me spent every Saturday night in the demonstrations, together with many people in Israel, trying to stop it. I have no problem with the reform, but not the way they did it. I have no problem in a reform. Reforms are good, especially if they are done properly. But that was a signal to the world. The world had a signal that Israel is shaking, especially the judicial system. Now, some of you here are bankers, some know the high-tech industry. Those that are going to invest in a country, not your country, I don't know what's going to happen here. If the country doesn't have a solid legal system, you don't invest because your money is not protected. And that was my concern. Okay, so I published some articles in the newspapers, and I was against a dramatic change. I have no problem with reevaluating, but I was against, and we showed what happened in the high-tech industry. It was clear, okay? As soon as we thought that, okay, something is happening and this is not clear, came the massacre, came October, and it changed everything. So the next slide is the war in Gaza, and this is my view about what is happening to the economy. The trajectory is clear, okay? Not upwards at this point. I have another slide, okay? So don't worry. That's not the bottom line. So the war brought some difficulties, and I want to show you one of the reasons why I'm optimistic. If you look at the multi-year graph about the chart, what happens, we go from the 90s, you could see all the crises that impacted, some of them impacted the world, like the COVID or the financial disaster, but other in 2008, but the others are local. The Intifada, some of the local operations, and so on and so forth. You remember we shall overcome? Let me just rephrase, we have overcome. And we went from the crisis up, sometimes even in a faster and better pace. So that's a reason why you should at least stay at this point optimistic, despite the fact that we are at this point at the downturn. But you realize that we're resilient, we know how to overcome. Following your charts, okay, the exchange rate and the stock exchange, don't look at the figures. Look at the direction. Is it here to stay? Honestly, I don't know. If I knew, I would invest. I have no clue. I'm not a banker and I have no clue. And my explanation to why it happens, honestly, it's pretty shady. It's a guess, because we don't really understand why the shekel is so strong. And I don't understand, we're still way below what if you compare it to the American stock exchange. But generally speaking, this is a trend, how the stocks go in the Israeli stock exchange. Is it a good purchase opportunity? Maybe, I don't know. All I can tell you is that I can easily document what happened until April, today's the 8th, April 8th. Have no clue what's going to happen tomorrow. So, there is a but to it. Okay? We grew, I'll show the numbers. Israel was in good shape before 23, and we are not in that good shape today. Okay? And I'm not going to color it in any color but rather than a dark one. Okay? So there is an impact, an ongoing impact of the current crisis that started, as I said, earlier in 2023, and there is an impact on the Israeli economy. Okay? I would say we are definitely weakened. Just let's look at some of the figures. So 2022 was 6.5%, the growth of the GDP. It was evident in the first slide when I compared it to the world. Due to the judicial reform and the hesitation of the multinationals, the expectation was that it will drop to 3.5, which is nice because OECD was 1.7. Okay? And then when the war in Gaza started, it dropped to about 2%. Okay? That was towards the end of 2023. And as I said, the OECD is still 1.7. Today, they say it's about 2%. I would probably estimate it at 1.5, or if I can be a bit pessimistic, I wouldn't be surprised if it is anything between 0 to 2. Okay? Because as we stand now, tomorrow is the last weekend of the Ramadan. We have no clue what's going to happen in this weekend. But if it stays like this and the war ends soon, we will be, inshallah, positive and probably at the range of about 1.5 to 2%. Moody's, a month ago, didn't think we were doing well. For the first time in many years, they downgraded Israel's rating to A2. On the other hand, I had this presentation. Elaine doesn't know, but I've been working on it for a few weeks now, and I had to update it on a constant basis because things move fast. So last week, Fitch decided not to downgrade our ranking at this point. Still, they look at a negative future, but that's who we are now. What's going to happen? The conclusion is there. Slow down. The extent, it really depends. In economics views, it always depends. So the question is, what happens to the war? If the American administration, due to the pressures on President Biden, he still wants to win, will decide that they are going to put a pressure on Israel to end the conflict soon. And if no other front develops, there is a chance that economically, I'm not talking politics, economically, it will basically, the slowdown will put to halt and we will start flourishing again from a good starting point. But that's just one scenario. The other scenario is that the war basically goes until the summer or the later month of the summer. It's going to be less effective. And if it goes all the way, and I don't even want to talk about other frontiers, then it's going to be a bit more gloomy, so not necessarily we have reached the bottom, but we'll certainly overcome. So, how can we mitigate the impact? How can we recover? And as you saw already, we're going to recover. The question is, how long will it take, and how are we going to recover? And I'm going to basically to convince you that we need to lean on the high-tech locomotive, the same one, the bullet train you saw. This is our only chance. So at this point, we're not in a good position. It has already been mentioned, about 360 Israeli youth, I would call them, people at the age group of, let's say, 20-something, early 20s to 50s, were enlisted or volunteered and basically left their jobs and went to the war. Now, with all due respect, Israel is about 10 million people, but we're not talking about 10 million people. We're talking about a portion of it, who are the guys who produce the GDP, the guys and ladies, by the way, who produce the GDP, who work in the high-tech, who serve, who pay taxes. It's the same community. And it's a fraction of the 10 million. It's not the entire 10 million. And I'm not going to go to the politics, especially the ambassador is here. I'm not going to embarrass you. But generally speaking, they were missing from the economic battlefield. They went to the real battlefield, but they were missing from the economic battlefield. And, the war costs a lot of money. Yes, we are supported by the Americans. And I just read in the newspaper, I think a couple of days ago, the figure may have changed, that in terms of philanthropy, more than $10 billion came already to Israel, and it's going to grow as soon as the war ends. Okay? So there is an inflow of currency, but as I told you earlier, every missile of the Iron Dome and every bomb and so on, they cost a lot of money. So we were hurt financially as well. That's the end of being gloomy. How can we basically flourish again? Now, being an academic, I'm going to stick to an academic model just to break it and understand what it has to do. And there is a model called the triple helix. In some cases, I call it the triple or the holy trio. And basically, it says that in order to have a solid and flourishing high-tech economy, you must have all three ingredients: government, business, and universities for the talent. The three of them. So what can they do? And what's your role over there? So the government, the government can be constructive as well. So first of all, the Israeli government is constructive since the 80s and the 90s of the previous century. The government is funding some of the early ventures through the Israel Innovation Authority, but they actually fund some of the early stage startups and other initiatives. The government helped with regulation, trying to help and ease things, and with taxation as well. So the government played a very solid role. Again, not constantly, not in basically through all the years, but the government played a positive role in the Israeli high-tech economy. They recently announced, they understand that basically currently there is a shortage of investments. So the government is now actually funding more startups in Israel, created a fund of funds and so on. But, since I'm not in politics, I think that I have, Mrs. Ambassador, I think I have a recommendation for the Israeli government, either this one or the next one to come. Instead of having 35 ministers, 30 of them for nothing, they should have one for the Israeli high-tech. That this will be her, preferably, or his day job and night job. To walk through the Israeli high-tech, pump the fuel in any way, not just money, into this locomotive and make sure it flourishes. Cross all the obstacles and the red lines and the ego and everything that is around there and work only towards one goal. The Israeli technology and high-tech sector being powered by the prime minister. And if I were prime minister, I would even nominate her or him to the deputy prime minister, because this is the most important role, I think, in the Israeli government to come. That's one. We had one like 5 years ago. He was in office. First of all, he didn't have the authority, and secondly, he was in office for 1 year to realize he cannot work. Just to pay justice, he's a good friend of mine. Another, if we look at the business, another is, if you look at the business world, and I'm looking at you guys, not personally, but I'm looking at you. Most of the funding of Israeli high-tech comes from the business world, with all due respect to the government. Okay? VCs is basically business money, investment money, LPs, and so on and so forth. This is exactly the time to invest in Israel. Why? First of all, prices are low in terms of high-tech and investments. And secondly, you saw the chart. You realize that if we hit rock bottom, there's only one way, up. So this is the time. I'm not trying to convince you here, but this is the time. Now, if you look, and I think, oops, not this one, but this one. If I look here, this chart was added a day before yesterday, just before I took off to come here. You could see the trend. For the first time in many months, there is a positive trend of investments in Israel. So somebody, before I made my speech, realized that this is a time to start investing, and there are already incoming investments. Last quarter, $3 billion into the Israeli industry just in 1 quarter. So it's not yet what we had in 2021, but people realize that this is what we need. And moreover, if you look at the second chart, and again, just the trends, the investments come from, I would say, 2 sources. Local investors, the orange one, and foreign investors. Still believing in the Israeli economy despite all the difficulties and making it. Skip this one. Let's talk about the third ingredient. That's the last one, by the way. Yeah. Ilan, mine is cheaper, it goes slower. So universities, it's not just because I'm a university professor, universities are the source for talent. Even the graduates of 8200 and others come to the university to understand methodology. They have their ideas, but they come to the universities. And we are the source of talent. Now, universities, basically for many years, actually for many decades and centuries, were recognized as the ivory tower, the source of knowledge. In many places around the world, including Berkeley and MIT, but also including Tel Aviv University, we realized that it's not just enough to educate. And it's not just enough to perform basic research. We, especially in Israel, especially due to the locomotive and whatever you saw, we need to grow entrepreneurs. Now, there is an agency, some of you may know, it's not Bloomberg, it's called PitchBook. PitchBook are ranking startups. In the last 2006, almost 20 years, once a year, towards the end of the calendar year, they rank universities that basically grew entrepreneurs. The only university outside of the USA to hit the top 10 is Tel Aviv University, ranked number 7. Now, being in charge of this ranking at the Tel Aviv, I can tell you, I'll level up with you. The first 4 are unmovable. If they are moved, they move in between. It's Stanford, Harvard, MIT, and Berkeley. With all due respect, we're Tel Aviv. Okay? And when I want to joke with my president, I say, well, the amount of money they raise in a day, you raise in a year. Okay? He's not offended. We know reality. So they are not unmovable. We're number 7. Number 6 is Cornell. My goal today, if you look from the bottom up, it's Tel Aviv, it's Cornell, and then it's Wharton and Philadelphia. I hope that by the time that my term as Chief Entrepreneurship ends, it's going to be Cornell, Tel Aviv, and then the others. All I want is to make number 6, and then we'll see. My successor can work for the next. But it's not just, not just praising Tel Aviv University. There are 5 Israeli universities in the top 50. Guys, we're talking Israel. Exclude, and I'm not politically correct, exclude the ultra-Orthodox, exclude many of the Arab population. Look at the actual population that works. We're a small country. Moreover, if you will look, I'm proud of this, by the way. I took PitchBook database, and these are some, there are 800, they didn't fit into one slide. These are some of the logos of successful startups from the School of Management. But generally speaking, these are the universities around the world that produce unicorns, companies that are worth more than $1 billion. With all due respect, yes, let me praise Tel Aviv University, we're there, but look at the flags. 3 flags shine. You decide on the size. Israel, okay, India, and Canada. Okay? The 3 largest countries in the world. So, what are we? I told you I'm a Chief Entrepreneurship Officer. What are we doing? And this has a Swiss connection. So I'm not going to skip this slide. I'm going to skip some others. I know you want Q&A and you're hungry. That's fine. So we have built a university-wide ecosystem that every student, every graduate, and every faculty can take part in. And it says the following. We are going to provide basic education, how to build a startup company, and what is entrepreneurship, and how you do ideation, even if you're not interested. Now, if I'm looking at the audience, and it was mentioned we have about 30,000 students, I know some of them. We have about 200,000 graduates. Not all of them are great entrepreneurs. If I want to be... I'll simplify the equation. You have the white, the dark, and the gray. The white represents those that were born entrepreneurs. On the day they were born, you know they're going to be entrepreneurs. I know some of them. The dark ones are lost cases. They will never be entrepreneurs. There can be excellent CTOs. They can be excellent whatever, psychiatrists or psychologists or whatever. I'm not offending, but I'm looking at the gray as well. This is a vast majority of people. If we can turn more towards the white, and hey, I have this gene, it's a bit rusted, let's remove the rust, and let's try and work it out. We've basically made the first step to go higher the rank. So we educate them, okay? And we conduct meetups and hackathons and seminars, whatever, just to tell them what it is. We take them to the next stage, which is basically those that are interested can take a division in the curriculum on entrepreneurship, and actually the pinnacle is that they actually perform a project, a technology project that is evaluated by external judges, and this might be the end for them. They tried in a friendly environment, and they go away, go to work for Google. But something was burned in their mind. So maybe later on they wake up, they know already how to do it. At the top, we have two levels. We have launched last year, the Dan Launchpad. This is my Swiss connection. Dan is Dan Holtzman, a good friend of Tel Aviv University, a good personal friend of us. And Dan, he didn't want his name, so we compromised on Dan. There are many Dans. But the Dan Launchpad is supposed to take startups in very early stages, both of students and graduates, and basically, in a professor's way, to move them to the money. Okay? Nurture them for a year or less, and if we need another month, we'll give it to them, to bring them to the first investment, to the seed or even A round, and then, like a bowling ball, put them on track, and hopefully they'll hit a strike. Okay? And there is a kind of a gentleman agreement. If you succeed, you'll take 1% of your income as a company, and you contribute it to any cause you want at Tel Aviv University. You're not obliged to. It's a moral obligation. And then at the end, we have the Tau Ventures, which is a venture capital of Tau alumni and Tau students and so on and so forth. And we have a startup competition that so far it's its 8th year now. Let me put it in my nice way. All 13 winners are still alive. They raised money. Some of them are very successful, but they are alive and kicking. So that I told you already. You can skip it. So, last 2 slides and eating. I'll split what's going to happen into 2. The high-tech industry and the Israeli economy. But you could see already, you have a hint here, the trend shifts. I'm already looking at the recovery. So, I'll take an example. I don't know how many of you are going to like it. You're all driving cars. You're all using computers. There is no one in the crowd that doesn't have a cell phone, at least one. Okay? All of them are driven by chips. And the chip capital of the world is Taiwan, not Israel. We produce some by Intel, but the chip capital is Taiwan. Why? Because Taiwan realized, the government realized, that this is how we are going to make our mark on the world. And everybody knows that basically Taiwan became the chip capital of the world. I know what is happening here in terms of, not here, everywhere, in terms of the atmosphere against Israel, against Jews, anti-Semitism, and so on. We can conquer it if everybody understands that Israel is a capital of either e-health or medical, any other devices, definitely cybersecurity. We need to basically rebuild our reputation so that every individual will realize that their life are basically impacted by Israel. For the last minute, I will be not politically correct because the foreign minister or minister of foreign affairs in Sweden talked about Israel like 5 or 6 years ago, and she said, you're not ambassador to Sweden, no, you're Luxembourg. Okay, so the ambassador there said, or the foreign minister said that they're going to ban Israeli technology. No, so the foreign minister at that point of time said, you're right. Go ahead, but you need to stop using your computers because the chips are produced in Israel, your cell phones because they're produced in Israel, the chips, and so on and so forth. But go ahead and stop using Israeli technology. We want to, I don't need anyone to say it. We want the world to realize it's going to take 5 years, that they cannot do without us. And if they cannot do without us, and the Tel Aviv University must have a mark on it, if they cannot do without us, maybe, just maybe, there will be a change in their mindset. Maybe. I believe that new technologies are going to come now by those soldiers that were released from the active duty, from reserve duty. They are eager to succeed, and I believe good things will emanate from there. And in terms of the economy, 2023 closed bad. 2024 may close even worse. 2025 has a much better forecast. And if what you saw in my analysis of the triple helix model, and if you realize that the government, the business world, and universities, we join forces to pump oil into the locomotive, we can be optimistic, and I think that we are going to flourish. So first of all, you can clap hands and go to it. And going along the lines of what you said earlier in the introduction, what's your role? Pick one. You could invest in Israel. Trust me, it's a good investment, especially if you don't need a fast return. It's the best one. Okay? Wait. It's going to be, you basically are going to catch, in my view, you're going to catch diamonds. Okay? So that's number one. Number two, invest in the human resource of Israel. Invest in the youth. Invest in women entrepreneurship. Okay, they are 50% of the population. Trust me, they're at least as bright as men, at least. And they can be, you could see what's happening in the battlefields. I mean, they have every war. Okay, they are leading. And if I'm not going to be politically correct, if men are looked at with IQ, they have both IQ and EQ. They have both. So I think invest in women, invest in young women, challenge the system, invest in Israeli talents, and may God be with all of us. Thank you.
So we'll start now with the Q&A. Don't ask me, ask the experts. Would you mind coming up or for the Q&A session?
Yes. Good afternoon. My name is Robert Kahn. I'm Swiss. My mother was Israeli, so I'm national before the Handelskammer decided to do that. Her Excellency, Mrs. Ambassador, dear friends on the podium, I have one but important question, and it may deviate slightly from your presentation. And I'm addressing you particularly not as the chief entrepreneur, but as the former dean.
Okay.
Israel has gone through a hard year in 2023, which was brought about the internal political situation. You talked about reform and, maybe more importantly, how it came about. I have friends in Israel which decided to leave the country before October 7. I have friends in Israel who decided not to buy the next house in Israel. I have friends in Israel who decided to sell the house, their home, and move some of the money away. So in all these inflection points about going up, I refer to your second image, which is the people on the streets. And how is Israel, after the war, which will end, all wars end, will come together rather than being divided, being straying from the democratic way which it was. This is my formulation. And I know it's a difficult question, and in particular since we have the representative of the government here. But, you know, in the spirit of Talmudic learning, we need to address also difficult questions. Thank you for bearing with this long question.
I hope my answer will be shorter. First, you're right. There are people who choose to leave the country. By the way, there were before, okay? I had friends who left the country 2 years ago and 3 years ago and 5 years ago. On the other hand, I can tell you that as dean, you know, I've been dean for 8 years. I managed to recruit 42 new faculty members, all of them from abroad that came to Israel. Okay, the entire size of the school is 60. So 2/3 are newly coming faculty, and I know that this trend continues today as well. So I would say that the trend is bidirectional. That's number one. Number two, and it has nothing to do with Switzerland, by the way, but you know, I'll give my own example. I used to travel as dean and even before to the United States. This is my job alma mater. I learned at Israel, but I started my academic career over there, and I used to go few times a year abroad, many of them to the US. And I visited tons of campuses. I will not step in a US campus today. I'm afraid. Okay? I know I'm not welcome, but it's not me. It's Israelis, it's their families, it's Jews. Many of them will realize, you are right, the war will end. Many of them will realize that the US today and Europe today are not the same place that used to be 6 months ago and a year ago. And eventually, my parents were Holocaust survivors. They told me that the only place for Jews is in Israel. I know not everybody is in a common understanding about this one, but many will come to Israel as well. And on the one hand, you have Israelis selling their property in Israel. On the other hand, if you look at the prices of property, it does not signal that the supply is larger than the demand. Okay? Many, on the other hand, are buying property in Israel because they realize that there might be some dark days abroad. And you know, I was just telling earlier that I was told by a colleague a week ago, a colleague from Harvard, that the Harvard University Council is currently considering numerus clausus. Limited, they have 20% of Jews on campus. It does not, it represents a Jewish mind. They don't have too many Arabs around there. 12%, they think it's too much. It does not reflect the population in the US. So they are considering limiting it. So you realize in our best ally. So you realize that Israel is not the safest place now, but is probably the safest place for Jews in the world. And the war will end. You know, I showed optimistic, realistic, and pessimistic. All of them end in a year or so. Israel may not be the same as it used to be a year ago, okay? It will take time to recover. We will flourish. And many of those guys who are going to go abroad will come back to buy property to realize that the prices are higher.
But Professor Zviran, I'm sorry to keep you to the task of answering the question. I didn't ask the question, what will happen with the Jews in abroad and who comes and not. I asked the question, how will the internal conflict, tension, division, you can put any label on it, that existed prior to the war, that has now been slightly put aside by the war, which will undoubtedly resurface if the same policy will continue. I'm not blaming the government or anybody. I'm just saying the country is completely...
You want me to blame the government? I will.
Yes, please.
No problem.
You are a taxpayer. You're entitled to it. But how is this going to be overcome? Because all the war stuff is going to be over, but the domestic problems, the domestic political problems, will not be over. I mean, people went to the streets 50 weeks in a row. Don't quote me on the number, and it will continue, maybe even fiercer afterwards.
I'll try to select my words, which I typically don't do. I don't think it's a problem of the people. I think that the struggle was basically fueled by some of the politicians to serve their own needs, political needs. You know, when I grew up, and you could see I'm not young, both my parents are from Poland. And at that time, if you brought a Romanian bride, I brought a Polish one. If you brought a Romanian bride, which is Ashkenazi, okay, it was a disaster. They couldn't speak to their neighbors. Later on, it expanded. You could bring somebody that is Ashkenazi, but if you brought somebody that is from the Eastern countries or the Arab countries, it was a disaster. One of my son-in-law is from Yemen. His parents are from Yemen. And the other son-in-law, his parents are from North Africa. And I love them. So things changed. And they fight shoulder to shoulder with their other friends. And there is no, basically, polarization in the army or in the society. The vast majority are unified today even more than before the judicial reform, because the judicial reform was pushed aside. I don't believe they will be able to revive it as they wanted to. So I believe that it is a matter now of politics, whether politicians will be able, and I think they will not, to push it back to the front of the stage. I doubt it. I think something changed in the DNA of the Israeli people. They realized that the threat is not from within, but from the outside. Again, I may be just optimistic, but my kids don't think to leave the country. We grow grandchildren in the country, and I think the country will flourish.
I think we'll have one last question, hopefully to Dr. Witschi, and then we'll start with the luncheon, and you can ask the two experts. They will happily answer during the lunch. One last question.
Can I ask him?
Later.
Thank you very much, all of you. Arthur Braunschweig. The term narrative today is in wide use, and I think we see three narratives today guiding the development of the world. The liberal one, which aims to have a good life. The authoritarian one, which aims for order. And a deep-rooted religious one, which aims for eternal recompensation. And I think the fights in Ukraine and in Gaza are two sides representing these triangle. Now, I would like to ask you, from your perspective, from the university in business and from the economic side, financial side, how do you see these fights? What do you think? Do you follow this? And what do you see the role of business in this?
I would say that when I look at financial markets, they're very sober. When they look at the Ukraine war, they have become quite easy. There's not a lot of concern anymore, as in the initial days of the Russian invasion. So financial markets are pragmatic, and they assume that Ukraine, for instance, will stay a country and that there will be some form of solution of this conflict. They do the same thing with Israel. Otherwise, we would see different signals in financial markets. They don't take sides in terms of the three camps you mentioned. They just want prosperity. And as things stand now, and as you can read the markets, they have become agnostic in terms of these three forces, as long as prosperity can be achieved by some compromise.
Thank you very much, everybody. We'll start with the preparation. You will have the chance to talk to the two experts. I would say we go over to this part of our show.
You're a master of ceremony, my friend.
Yes, thank you very much. So I wish you all een goeie, beteavon, and thanks for coming.